Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. Our mission is to see a world well led. And our strategy to get there? To empower leaders like you to lead every day. So let's get to work.
Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. I'm Randy Gravitt.
And I'm Mark Miller.
And we are glad you've joined us today. Leaders out there all over the world listening, we're pumped that we get to hang out with you for a few minutes. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that I think might be the most important thing we've talked about in a while, Mark, because it's the topic of communication, not just communication, but internal communication in an organization. You'll remember, Mark, a few weeks ago, we talked about the public speaking side of communication. If anybody's listening and you're like wanting to be a better public speaker, hope you'll go back and check that episode out. Any of our content there that'd be helpful to you, but that's probably the one that I would point you to. But today, let's talk internal communication. How many times, Mark, have you had leaders share with you when we're talking, we're doing a keynote or specifically in a workshop? I've had over and over organizations, leaders in organizations say, we need to communicate better. We need to communicate better. We need to communicate better. We don't communicate well. It is just, it's amazing how many people struggle with this. And yet, honestly, if we look back on our careers, most of us weren't taught how to communicate. Weren't maybe shared, some of the things we're going to share today. Nobody ever told me these things. I mean, you kind of learn them through the school of hard knocks. But what we do know is if you don't communicate correctly or appropriately, consistently, whatever the adjective we would use or the adverb we would use there, I think it's going to be really hard for you to accomplish what you're trying to do in your organization. So, Mark, it's communication day, man. Let's get after it.
Yeah, and let me just echo what you just said. I have so many leaders that when you really challenge them about the problems, the barriers, the obstacles. Now, I'm not talking about the environment. I'm not talking about tariffs or taxes, but I'm talking about in their organization. And you really pin them down on what are some of the root causes. That short list almost always includes communication. Leaders may have a level of clarity that is beyond impressive. And then you come to the next level and it's a little bit of ambiguity, and you get down to the front line. It's like they don't have a clue regarding those things that are so clear to senior leaders. And they're endless examples where an organization or a team would be better if their leaders understood and were disciplined to communicate a little bit better. So I am excited that we're going to share some really, really tactical things today that every leader can do to improve communications in your organization.
Yeah, you said it there, the tactical side. We're going to share a kind of I'll call it a hodgepodge of strategies and tactics, and I don't necessarily have any particular order here. I would just say for anybody listening, if they'll just latch on to one or two things that we talk about today and try them, I promise you communication will improve and ultimately performance will improve, because we're not communicating just to communicate. We're chasing performance. We're trying to see how good can we be, or can we accomplish what we set out to do? Can we achieve the goal? Can we hit the mission? All that stuff. And it's not going to happen without proper communication. As you said there, I mean, how many times have we been in a situation where better communication would have just made it better, would have helped us, would have been enabled. It really is the enabler of performance, one of the big enablers of performance. So I can't wait to jump in here with this thing. Okay, so let me make a statement here to start. I would say all the organizations I've talked to, I would say that communication is the oxygen of any organization. I mean, it really is. If you will communicate correctly, it will breathe life into your organization. Now, Mark, I got a question for you. Have you ever been in an oxygen deprived or depleted circumstance in your life? Ever been in a situation like that?
I actually have. I was climbing with my oldest son. We were on Mount Kilimanjaro, and we were on our summit assault. It was the middle of the night. It was sleeting, pitch black, cold. There was ice everywhere. And we were probably at 17,000 feet, may have gotten to 18, when all of a sudden my vision began to blur, and I really was disoriented, and I was able to, kind of get hold of my guide, and I explained what was happening, and he knew exactly what was happening because the lack of oxygen affects different people differently and at different altitudes. And so we stopped and were there for a while, and I drank a bunch of water, and things began to get clearer. I began to acclimate to that new level, and then we were able to continue to the summit at over 19,000 feet. But I find it interesting, the parallels when there's a lack of oxygen in organizations. People lose their bearings. They can become disoriented. They don't know what they should do next. They find it increasingly difficult to do what they do know that they should do next. You got to have oxygen to live. You've got to have it to thrive. And the same is true in an organization.
Yeah, you got to have communication in an organization. I think some of our listeners just figured out why they're having a hard time seeing straight. It's like this is like, oh my goodness, it is. Yeah, it's a big deal that we make sure that we are stewarding the messaging correctly if we're the leader. It's so important, and at all levels of the organization, it's important. Okay, so we said we're going to get some tactics and some strategies here. Let's start with maybe clarifying the message. To me, that feels like the place to start, Mark. When we and here's maybe a way we could do it. We said we'll make this tactical. If we have a meeting, at the end of the meeting, we've said something. What if we make sure that everybody is going to say, what we're supposed to be saying here? We can test that right at the end of a meeting. You gotta. Yeah,
let's agree. Let's agree on what we agreed on.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, you can and you can also decide what not to communicate. I mean, there's things that you may need to go out and everybody's this is what we're going to say to who, and this is what we're not going to say at this point to who, So I think sometimes we get a little bit of information and we're going to go run and talk to everybody, and not everybody needs to know everything at the same time. And so I think the more clear we are on who we talk to today about what, but it starts with clarifying the message. That feels like a good starting point there.
Yeah. And it links to this second idea about cascading the message. What you really don't want to happen is to cascade confusion. And I've lived in that world. Thankfully not a lot, but we had a situation at one point where the messages were not clarified, specifically from our executive team, and everybody was cascading, but they were cascading different messages. And it was bizarre. It's like, did you hear what happened in today's meeting? I said, I did, and then we would talk and realize that you had heard something else and talked to a third person and they heard something else. So there was no clarity. And so they weren't cascading the message. They were cascading confusion. And that doesn't help. So in that particular instance, back to tactics, they ended up capturing the key takeaways from the meetings, and they all sent that message to their teams. Now, of course, it would still create an opportunity for narrative and conversation, and there were still people involved, but the team, that senior team, agreed on, here are the three things. We're putting it in an email, and it's going to everybody at this next level. So cascading is hugely important. And then, of course, you get to decide, is it going to cascade to the next level? And if so, by whom, by when? I mean, you and I have talked about this in the past. That's why so many organizations struggle with execution, because these critical messages don't cascade all the way to the front lines. They get lost somewhere or along the way. And so when we've been trying to help organizations improve execution specifically, we put disproportionate effort on communications, on cascading communications.
Yeah, it reminds me, Mark, you and I years ago wrote The Secret of Teams. No, it wasn't. It was the Chestnut Checkers Field Guide. I remember we were talking about alignment in an organization, and this thing's probably, I don't know, it's 150 pages of basically application on building a high performance organization. It was great field guides, fun. But I remember one night we're looking at the final mock-up of the thing, and over about a third of the way through, there were two little blanks that were cascading communication was what would go in the two blanks. This was back in the old fill in the blank days. And I remember we were having dinner and you looked at those two blanks and you said, those may be the two most important lines in the entire book. I mean, we got this book about, leadership and alignment, engagement, execution. It was great. But it was like these two little things. And I remember you saying, if you can't cascade communication, I'm not sure any of the rest of it matters. I mean, this is such a big,
it doesn't matter.
It's such a big thing. And let's build here.
Well, let me say one thing before we move on. We have field tested this, and I have sat around tables with leaders who will, again, if you press them a bit and you ask enough questions, they will tell you that the challenge is typically at the front lines, which doesn't mean the challenge at the front lines. The front lines they're just trying to do what they're supposed to do the best they understand it. And you can almost always pull that thread and realize the key messages have not made it to the people who are actually interacting with your guests, or they're producing the widgets, or they're providing the service. They don't know what they don't know, and that's not on them. That's on poor cascading communications.
Well, and let's make up a mythical organization here and say there are 8 levels, and, there's a leader and then the leadership team, and you go all the way down to the front line. Let's just say there's 8 mythical levels here. And if communication stops at level 2 or level 3, I promise you the people at level 8 still have communication. They're just making stuff up in the absence of messaging. And so I think it's so important for us to understand that some message is going to be heard. If we don't say something, they're going to make up their own message. And so this cascading communication really can be transformational to an organization. This may be the missing link right here. It's like, at the leadership table, what we're saying, we talk about it all the time. You got to make sure that you're getting that to the front line. Everybody's seeing and saying the same thing. Becomes so again.
All right, so let me share an example of what we're talking about. In our most recent global study of leaders, 60% of the senior leaders said their organization had an agreed upon working definition of leadership. Well, congratulations. Unfortunately, when we talked to the frontline leader, 70% said they had no idea. So if you can't cascade it, you don't spend a lot of time patting yourself on the back because you've got a concept or a truth or an idea or a strategy. Only take a moment to celebrate when those closest to the work actually are aligned with what you had in mind to start with.
Yeah, that's good, Mark. Don't celebrate that you know what you know if somebody else is supposed to know and they don't know. That's just great. And this really can be, as I said, it can be transformational if we get this cascading communication piece down. This can be huge. Okay, so if we're going to do that, I would say the next thing we might want to think about is the receiver. Who's hearing what we're saying? And let's remind ourselves that not everyone hears in the same way. We all have different styles of learning we've heard about, in school. I think we have different ways of hearing. And so a memo might be, great for somebody. An email might be good. Somebody might need to be, talked to about it. Like, you're going to have to know what's going on, but the goal is to make sure that the message is heard and understood and carried out, not just that it's said in one way, one form. We've got to say it multiple times. I heard a leader say one time, you need to say it, spray it, wheel it, deal it. You ought to be in the communication business if you're a leader.
Yeah. And I think it's easy to be self-deceived. So when you talk about cascading communications as an example, and a leader might say, yeah, I produced a video and sent it to everybody. Well, that's what we're talking about. You got to think about the men and women downline, the people who are receiving the information. They are not channel agnostic. They have preferences. I was reminded of that a few years back when I had assembled a team outside the organization and brought them in, and I'd sent them a video for preparation for the meeting, and nobody had watched the video. And I was kind of like, I wonder what's up with this. And somebody like picked up on what I was thinking, and they said, you really can't hold us accountable if you're going to use the mode of communication that we don't use. It's like, just like, oh, I sent them a text or I dropped them an email. Well, did it connect? Did it work? Was the message received? And again, I think we just live in a world where the answer, singular, is multi-channel. If you want to be sure everybody's got a message throughout your organization, you're going to probably have to do it multiple ways.
Yeah, just this idea of saying it differently at different times and in different ways. You know, one email is probably not going to be enough to get the message across and to really elevate the message. I mean, to show it's important. I think we've got to make sure that we're focused on different ways of saying it at different times with different people.
Well, let me say one more word about saying it differently. Different formats, different style, not just different channels, right? Some people want to hear the data. Some people want to hear a story. Some people want you to diagram the play for them, right? They need a visual. So just be mindful. Randy mentioned it earlier. Different people are going to receive and process information differently. And as leaders, we've got to be really careful because our go-to is probably our personal preference. And that's going to miss a large percentage of your audience.
Yeah. I like being fluent in the learning style and the language style of the people around the table. You need to be able to speak to connect with each one of them. And I think if we're not careful, we can think I just said it the way I always like to hear it. And that doesn't necessarily, that didn't connect always. And so the job is to make sure that the communication has been cascaded as far as it needs to be, not that I've said it one time and I can check the box and move on. If you know, ultimately performance is on the line here, as you said earlier. Okay. Mark, you are a proponent of being simple, not simplistic. Can you talk about a little bit of simplifying your writing style? I know that we've given, you know, credence to verbal communication here, but you know, there is written communication. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, sure. I mean, there's still a lot of written communication, whether it be email, whether it be text, whether it be brochures. I mean, you're writing stuff that is communicating or attempting to communicate within your organization. And we need to write to express, not impress. It's something that works. I mean, you think about the major newspapers in the world are written on the 6th and 7th grade level. I think the Wall Street Journal might be the highest that I'm aware of on the 11th grade level. My mama always told me not to let my college show. I have editors that help me with this. They'll say, hey, can you simplify this? Can you use words that are more accessible? I actually had the privilege of being tutored, mentored, or coached, depending on the way you want to look at it, by the former president of our company. Now, this was years and years ago. I'll tell you how far back it was. We were writing paper email or sending out paper emails through the mail, the U.S. mail. That's how old school this was. And it was a small organization, and he had a policy that nothing went to the entire chain until he had approved it. And so what he would do for me specifically is he would edit an email. He'd mark it all up and give it back to me, and I'd rewrite it and I'd send it to him, and he'd mark it up and edit it again. And it took him about 5 years probably to convince me that I need to make simple, clear, short sentences. And he said, guess what will happen? People will understand what you're saying. You won't eliminate, but you can greatly reduce ambiguity if you'll just use simple, plain language. And that's kind of been my approach for 45 years. And very rarely does somebody say, I don't know what you just said, or I don't understand you. That's on purpose.
Yeah, years ago, you remember I wrote Finding Your Way. I got a copy of Finding Your Way here. By the way, if anybody's looking for a graduation gift, I think that's about right now going on. You got a college kid or a high school kid, Finding Your Way is a good one, but it'll help them discover what they need to do in this next season, possibly. But Bill Curry, you'll remember, Mark, Bill Curry was a former Green Bay Packer, and then I think he coached at Alabama. And anyway, a few years ago, he started up the football program. You'll remember this here in Atlanta at Georgia State. I think that's your alma mater, right? I mean,
That's correct.
Didn't you? Okay, so Bill Curry starts the program, and he got a copy of Finding Your Way for all the guys on his team. And here's what he said after he read it. He said, "I love this book for these players," and we're like, "Why? What's the big deal?" He goes, "It's so simple." He said, "It's like an 8th grader could understand this," and he's like, "This is what we need at this level. Like we need something that's just simple that we could read." And so it's exactly what you're talking about. I mean, it doesn't have to be impressive to be impactful. And I think so many times we just get wordy on stuff, and if we're not careful, we get lost in translation, so to speak. So simplifying the writing style. I think another thing we could say is simplify your PowerPoint presentations or your presentations, however you do them, Keynote or PowerPoint. You might even chunk your slides all together, but if you are going to use slides, fewer slides are better than more slides, and fewer words on a slide. I was going to say fewer words on a slide. I mean, I never would want something they're going to have to sit there and read. You want them listening to you, not reading a slide. You want to be connecting to people, not just writing a bunch of words on a presentation. I've seen so many what I would call bad presentations, and you just lose people when you get too wordy there. So that's another one. Where do you want to go next?
Well, I'm tempted to talk about PowerPoint, but we won't. It is 95% of the PowerPoint slides I've seen in my life need to be redone. So it is so abused. In fact, it's the script for a lot of communicators, and they're going to sit there and read it to you. And I think that's insulting, and it undermines the leader's credibility, right? Do you know what you came here to talk about, and can you do it from your heart and from your mind? Even if you've got notes, it's like you don't want to read it to people. And by the way, when you put all that stuff on the slides and you put it on the screen, it's too small for them to read it. So it's just be really, really, really careful. Use it sparingly. As you said, as few slides as possible with as few words as possible. And it can be an effective tool. It's just usually not. So that's kind of my deal on that. But back to our list, I would say that you've got to become comfortable saying it again. And we've referenced this a couple of times. There's a lot going on, and people don't generally get it the first time. Maybe they don't get it the second time. Maybe they don't get it the third or fourth time. And you're going, seriously? Yes, seriously. John Cotter, former professor at Harvard, when he did his initial study on change, he estimated that organizations under-communicated key messages around the change by a factor of 10. Now, I know John Cotter. I respect John Cotter. I think he missed it. In my experience, organizations under-communicate key messages around the change times 100. There is so much going on. And when you're trying to do something new, something different, something out of the norm, you got to say these things over and over and over again. And when you want to instill values and you want to reinforce culture, it's not just when you're trying to change, it's when you're trying to get stuff to stay the same. You got to say it over and over and over again. And leaders, we get tired of talking about the same things, but that's part of our job, is to talk about the things that are important over and over and over again. And people will get it if you don't give up.
Mark, an example of this would be your former boss, old Truett Cathy, before he passed away. I know one of his legacies, a lot of people in the world have felt, is this idea of when you go to Chick-fil-A, everybody listening who's ever been to a Chick-fil-A and said thank you, they've heard those words, "my pleasure." That came at a cost, right? It took Truett a while. He didn't just get up one day and say, if anybody says thank you, we're going to say "my pleasure." Can you unpack like kind of how that unfolded? I've heard stories about this.
Sure. Well, Truett did come up with the idea, And he did share it at one of our annual meetings during his keynote. He just told the audience, at the time there were probably 5,000 people in the room, all the Chick-fil-A restaurant operators, their spouses, all the staff and their spouses. And he said, when someone says thank you, I want you to say my pleasure. And so, I can't speak for everybody in the room, but people thought, well, isn't that nice? What a thoughtful gesture. And that's an interesting idea. So 12 months later, Truett shows back up at that meeting and he said, hey, last year, this is still during his keynote address the following year, he shows up and he says, last year I told you that when folks said thank you, we're going to say my pleasure. And I don't think you guys heard me because I've been out there in the restaurants and it's not happening. So we're going to practice. And so he said, thank you. And people said, my pleasure. Just say it louder and say it again and stand up and say it. And so he did it the second year. And it got a little more traction, but he came back the third year and said, hey, now you've made some progress. That's good, but it's still not consistent and let's practice. Well, here's the rest of that story. He did that every year for 10 consecutive years.
Oh, and man.
He had to say it over and over again, in part because the Chick-fil-A operators employ about 500,000 team members with 100% turnover. And so the operators weren't going to be able to stop saying it. They couldn't say it one time. And Truett understood he couldn't say it one time either. This idea of strategic repetition is pretty powerful.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I think the other piece of that is that Truett kept coming back to it, and I think the last thing I would leave people with here as a tactic today would be to document your action items. If you assign something to be communicated, you got to come back and check and ask, how do we do that? Well, you and I would both probably say pound for pound, documenting your action items might be the best thing you can do to help accelerate your progress. And so I think there's something here about communication that would fall under this action item.
Yeah, but
piece.
I want to broaden it. I mean, yes, I'm not even talking about document your action items pertaining to communication. If you'll document all your action items on any topic, because oftentimes what I think you'll find if you don't have not embraced that practice is that people will say, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to do that. Or I didn't know I was supposed to do that by Thursday. Or that's not what I agreed to. And so the absence of documented action items is the seed bed for confusion and for chaos and for misalignment and missed opportunity. So I think it's a communication strategy in and of itself to say, when we agree in a meeting that ABC is going to happen by Thursday and who's going to do it, we write that down. It really makes a full circle back to our first idea, which was clarify the message. The message is we're going to do ABC by Thursday, and here's who's going to do it. And so it is a communication strategy in and of itself, in addition to when you document communication action items.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I want to leave it today, Mark. I would say if anybody's out there listening and I ask you to hold your breath for a minute, you probably could do that. I mean, it might push you a little bit, but you probably could hold your breath for a minute. But if I ask you to put a pillow over your face and to breathe, you could do that for longer than a minute. But eventually, and you can even fool yourself into thinking, I'm still breathing, I'm okay. Eventually, you're going to, you can only do that for so long as well. You're going to pass out. It's not going to be a good thing. I don't recommend it. But here's what I can tell you. If you are not communicating in your organization, you literally have a pillow over the face of what's going on. You are suffocating your own work, your own vision, your own team, your front line. I mean, it's those messages are going to be made up if you don't share those. So take something that we've talked about today and go be better at internal communications. This is not just your job as a leader. This is the job of everybody in the organization to make sure we've created an environment where communication is rich and vibrant. And Mark, back to your Everest story, if we get this right and we get the oxygen, that's the cool thing about it. If we're depleted, we can infuse life-giving communication into our organization and ultimately scale the summit, which is pretty cool.
Keep climbing.
About it.
Keep climbing.
We keep climbing.
Keep climbing.
That's exactly It's exactly what we would say. We'd also say keep sharing with your friends and family. Keep listening. Let us know if we can help you. LeadEveryday.com. And never forget, the best leaders lead every day.